Hello there, kia ora. Welcome to this week's Omnibus edition. I'm going to keep this one really short because, well, in the last 5 minutes, we've just had another extreme weather warning come in from Met Service. It's obviously been a week of it with everything that's happening with Cyclone Tam, or what's left of Cyclone Tam. Well, I had a power cut all day on Thursday. We had a power cut overnight last night, and who knows, it might happen again today. So I figured get this out of the way really fast. It's actually one of the reasons why there's been so few videos this week, is because it's really hard to make stuff when you don't have electricity to power the computers that you use to edit everything together. And like, I could technically do it on my laptop. Oh, it's so much more frustrating that way. Anyway, this week we took a look at the Media Trust Report, which was a really fascinating thing to see. It's a long-term piece of research, so it gives you a lot of stuff to track. But I was really curious to see how people voted and how much they trust the media. There was an interesting correlation there. But there was also a bit of a follow-up piece to that later on in the week when we looked at how media are platforming some of the hate and abuse that female politicians are getting at the moment in the lead up to the local body elections, in an effort to say, look, this is really bad, and make sure you look out for it. Like, it's not done in a way to glorify the horrible shit that those women have to go through. And then, of course, we followed up with the news, which ended up being like 15 minutes long. Like, it was huge. It was really weird because there was so much stuff that happened in a week where Parliament's not even sitting. Is kind of depressing in itself. So yeah, sit down, make sure that you enjoy this week's Omnibus, and if you haven't done so already, feel free to like, share, subscribe to the video, and remember, if you're a paid up YouTube member, you get to see this before anybody else does. I don't know if that's a perk or not, but there is some exclusive YouTube member content as well going out at the moment. So yeah, give that a consider, or just sit down and enjoy the video. Either are good options. Hello there, kia ora. Over the weekend, the latest AUT report into media trust was released. This is a report that gets done every year, and this is the 6th year that it's been running, and it's got some fascinating results. Each year they track trust in journalism, and they do this with a survey of just over 1,000 people who get asked 16 questions, and then some follow-up focus groups are also involved. It showed that the decline in trust overall has dropped about a percentage point from last year, and that's within the margin of error. And some media outlets have increased the level of trust that they get from their audiences, like Whakaata Māori, Iwi Radio, RNZ, and the Spin-Off, with RNZ reclaiming the title of most trusted news brand from the Otago Daily Times, which took it last year. It also found that news avoidance here in Aotearoa is higher than overseas, while interest in the news is also higher. And that's been put down to the constant onslaught of news that you get a lot overseas that we don't tend to have here. It also showed that we tend to want more local news, international news, and to be kept up to date with politics, while we really don't like entertainment and celebrity news. You know, like the kind that the Herald has been spamming social media with a lot these days. It found 53% of us use Facebook, 43% of us use YouTube, 39% of us use Instagram, and 17% of us use TikTok to source news. Anyway, the most fascinating part of this for me is the new questions that they've added this year that actually asked respondents to tell us who they voted for in the 2023 general election, which netted results that will not really shock you at all. The voters who voted for parties on the right had the highest distrust levels of media, as did voters of Te Pāti Māori. Those voters came down to how mainstream media framed Te Pāti Māori in a Pākehā-centric way, using more aggressive terms to frame what the party and its supporters do or say than they use on other parties in Parliament. In fact, they often use talking points from ACT or National as framing devices for those news stories. And parties that are full of conspiracy theorists and cookers like ACT, Democracy, New Zealand, New Zealand First, those far-right parties, they show an exponential distrust in media because the media keeps telling them that they're wrong. Because they're wrong. In fact, 25% of regular news avoiders voted for ACT. 27% of news avoiders voted for New Zealand First, preferring instead to get their news from the reckons of their mates on Facebook who are selling dried frog boner pills to see whether or not they could be seen as reliable news sources. But one of the other bits of data that we got was how these voters saw specific media outlets. Those on the far right actively distrust Stuff, RNZ, TVNZ, the Newsroom, the Herald, and the Spin-Off, while explicitly trusting NBR and News Talk ZB. Those who identified as centre-right also distrusted TVNZ and Stuff more than any other media outlet, while those on the left distrusted the Herald and News Talk exponentially. But overall, those on the left tended to have a wider range of media outlets that they put their trust into. And a clue to the reasons behind this can actually be found in those focus groups that they did with this. Within the focus groups, those who identified as voters for ACT called media corrupt and dishonest, far left, and nasty. A middle-aged National Party supporter thinks media is being mean to conservatives, while Labour supporters said media never challenges politicians, and another said that they constantly amplify the same voices over and over, entrenching their ideological viewpoint with audiences. What this highlights is that there is an underlying issue with people's understanding of bias within our media and the impact that our own biases have. For example, a number of focus group respondents claim media needs to report facts from all perspectives and let the audience make up their mind. Facts don't usually have perspectives, but news, like all media, is constructed to present information in a certain way. A great example is how this particular media piece that you're watching right now is framed to make ACT and New Zealand First voters come across as uninformed and willfully ignorant. That's bias in action. Because this is a piece of media, that's what we would call media bias. My personal bias is that that's obviously not true. Some of them are just racist, bigoted, and cruel. But if that bias in mainstream media doesn't align with our own, we often see that as not reporting the facts from the perspective that I agree with, therefore nullifying the facts. The reality is that due to our own personal biases, which we all have, it's very difficult to spot the actual bias in a media organization, and we're not really taught the tools that are needed to identify it. There are some great simple markers that you can use to try and identify media bias by looking at their content. If they choose to focus on individual over collective outcomes, actions, and responsibilities, the voices that they choose to platform, the focus level on business interests, how they platform religious themes, the type of emotionally charged language that they use, the topics that they cover regularly, and other platforms that they're affiliated with, and how nationalistic they appear to outsiders. And our mainstream media here in Aotearoa tends to lean right on that spectrum, but not on all topics. They tend to, but not exclusively, lean left on climate change, for example, advocating action to tackle climate change over claiming scientific uncertainty. The final question given to the focus group, though, is possibly my favourite. What can journalists do to regain public trust? Their answer? Journalism. Focusing on investigative journalism, community-based and grassroots reporting, and stop posting bullshit like who said what on Married at First Sight like it's the start of World War III. I think that's pretty solid advice. Hey, thanks for there, kia ora. You may have noticed in the media over the past couple of weeks a lot of stories like these, around women in elections who have to deal with a torrent of gendered abuse. Well, there's a few reasons why these are actually coming out now. The first is that local body elections are on in, just 6 months, October 11, which is why we're getting a lot of news about who's running and who is standing down. A 6-month campaign is pretty standard for local elections. The second is to try and correct what we call a representative imbalance. One of the eternal hopes for elected bodies is that they represent the wider population. They look the same as the population that they represent. And in theory, this means a wider range of viewpoints, a variety of lived experiences and perspectives that will help result in better decisions that consider the wider population as a whole. There are some representation areas which have seen improvements. Māori representation, for example. 21% of all elected local body officials identify as being of Māori heritage, and the last census result shows that that's pretty much on par with the current population for the whole country. And that was only achievable because of the introduction of Māori wards without the expensive referenda. But when it comes to representation, our local councils still have some imbalances. For example, they're overrepresented by members who are over 65 years old, which runs higher than the national average. And this is down to actually who votes in those elections. The average voter turnout was just over 30% last time, and the most likely to vote groups were people who are older, Pākehā, and homeowners. So that demographic tends to be overrepresented in the final election outcome. And women are still underrepresented in our local councils. Women make up just over 50% of the population and only 45% of local government officials. When it comes to a gender balance in elected council representation, that's still not matching the overall population. But we have a problem as a country. There's a huge undercurrent of misogyny in politics. It's actually kind of obvious when you see things like what the Prime Minister and Associate Health Minister did earlier this week by demanding Te Whatu Ora call pregnant people women, instead of going on a case-by-case, best with a person involved basis. It's demanding that women fit a specific gender ideology that these politicians share. Gendered attacks on female politicians is not uncommon across the political spectrum, and the same goes for local governance as well. There have been a number of high-profile threats against women in politics over the past 6 years, and this leads to a problem. Why on earth would any woman want to put their hat in the ring for an elected role when they're being attacked for being a woman? And some of those attacks are incredibly vile. All of these stories share 3 commonalities. Yes, there is a horrid number of asshole men out there who feel attacking a woman because she's a woman is fine, but also the work that they do as elected representatives within their community, well, it allows them to connect with people. They see it as a validating experience. And as we get to the point where people are making up their minds about running for local government, knowing the risks and rewards of being elected is important in that decision-making process. And the research around achieving gender equality in elected representation is actually really clear. Having a balance of who is running and making sure that there are a range of people with varied perspectives and areas of expertise represented across genders. The more women that run, the more likely we are to see those results on election day match the overall population. There's also a third perspective being shown here, though, that there is a need for hate speech regulation in a country that we don't currently really deal with hate speech all that well. The line between hate speech and free speech for some people is a really difficult one to draw sometimes, although the generally confirmed consensus is that hate speech is speech which stirs up and incites hatred and harm against an individual or community. It's a topic the current government refuses to tackle, and one that some AstroTurf groups leap on to champion because they see blanket free speech, no matter how harmful or who gets hurt and targeted, as an important element of democracy that they need to uphold, no matter the cost. But it also means that there are great people with a great range of experience who don't feel comfortable putting themselves on the ballot to run for an elected position because of the risks to themselves and those around them, while others who tend to associate with those who are happy to throw hate speech at candidates and elected officials feel emboldened to front up, meaning an unbalanced local representation at the end of the election cycle. So if you're considering a run this election, now is the time to really consider what that means and what that looks like, and being aware of what that actually involves is a big part of it. Chances are, if you're a woman, there will be some tiny dicked dude who sees that as a problem. And if you're not a woman and looking to run, it's a good opportunity to be a real ally to women who may face these challenges. Voters should be able to choose between the best possible candidates, and we only get to have the best possible candidates if people feel safe running. Hello there, kia ora, I'm Paul, and this is this week's The News. The upper half of the North Island is this weekend in recovery mode after the impact of Cyclone Tam. The storm caused severe damage to major infrastructure, including power, internet, and phone service cutoffs, with roads also being damaged, and some parts of the far north are expected to be without power for up to 3 days. Auckland suffered power cuts and minor flooding, the Bay of Plenty saw major road closures, as did the Coromandel, and Tairāwhiti is under a heavy rain warning, as repair crews work tirelessly around the clock to reinstate services. Said the Prime Minister on Thursday afternoon, seen here finding out that he's too slow when going low with Mike Hosking. Look, what I'm saying to you is inflation is well under the 7% it used to be, and it's so weird that builders are looking for work. If only there was something that we could do as the government before he didn't declare a state of emergency. At least this way we're bringing some much needed financial relief to those impacted by lowering their power bill for days. New Zealand supermarket chain Pack and Save has unveiled new signage which has confused racists all over the country. The sign reads proudly NZ owned, and underneath the phrase "Nō Aotearoa" can be seen. In Te Reo Māori, the phrase means from or of New Zealand, but racists are claiming the term is referencing government policy and Facebook comment threads by removing the language. When asked what the macron above the O means, Brian Kennedy replied with, I thought macarons were in the biscuit section. In a rising cost of living crisis, the government has once again tackled the issue head on as Associate Health Minister Casey Costello, seen here wondering why you're not smoking, demands health staff stop using the term pregnant people. The inclusive term is used to be inclusive, but as Costello said, we include everyone that we consider to be our voting base, and they think including everyone is woke. Speaking of the cost of living crisis, while government ministers have taken every opportunity since being elected to take credit for long expected and planned for drops in inflation after the global pandemic supply issues returned to relative normality, they have been very quiet since it was announced inflation has risen again to 2.5%, which Stats NZ announced earlier this week. The main drivers for this increase was the 3.5% increase in food items, power increases, and rental and rates increases. This has been coupled with new Treasury forecasts which show a slowdown in expected growth markers, meaning a longer, harder period for New Zealanders financially. Said Finance Minister Nicola Willis, seen here showing you her impression of Eric Cartman and his friend Miss Jennifer Lopez. Can you imagine how bad it would have been if we had competent financial management in place? But someone has to pay for tax cuts for the landlords and tobacco companies. Embattled Elam MP Hamish Campbell, seen here with the two young NAP members who in 2022 were outed as being behind a massive amount of gendered abusive messages sent to female politicians, has confirmed he is, in fact, a senior elder within the mysterious sect known as the 2x2s, a group currently under investigation by both the FBI and the New Zealand Police, which this morning revealed several new investigations due to 27 reported allegations over counts of sexual abuse. Initially, Campbell claimed he had an association with the group through family, but after multiple sources came forward, he admitted his position of power within the organisation. Said a spokesperson for the Prime Minister's office, "We stand by our vetting process, and as you know, we don't let ideology drive our decisions. But we're still looking at canning RSE, demanding pregnant people be called pregnant women, considering Winston's penis bathroom police, and putting a conservative Christian in charge of abortion access." Health Minister Simeon Brown, seen here talking to the dwarf doc from Snow White because he thought the dude worked at Nelson Hospital, has hit out at plans for salaried medical professionals to undertake a 24-hour strike in May over pay rates. While incorrectly claiming medical staff were paid exponentially more than they are, which is still on the lower end of the scale for the work they do in other regions like Queensland, Brown said he was upset that medical professionals would use patients as bargaining chips because they wouldn't accept a pay rise lower than the rate of inflation like they made minimum wage earners deal with. Look, it's not acceptable, he said, to put people's medical care at risk and use them as bargaining tools, unless you're the government that's underfunding the health sector and putting people's lives at risk for the greater good, or promising life-saving cancer drugs that you decide not to fund in the budget, or to save money for those landlords and tobacco companies. Immigration New Zealand is calling the new Golden Visa program a success after almost 50 US millionaires tried to escape the hellstorm they created in the United States, have applied for the fast-track program to Kiwi citizenship, with 7 having been accepted so far. Said Immigration Minister Erica Stanford, seen here wondering if this is a hobbit hole, those 7 people are bringing in $35 million of investment to the country, and all it will cost us is dealing with them for a week a year. And of course, a small gratuity to the party that made it possible for them to be here wouldn't go astray. The National Party this week celebrated a win for the Labour Party in its fight against violent crime. At an Auckland press conference with Auckland-based media where the Prime Minister told reporters they needed to get out of their bubble in Wellington sometimes, and an admission from Police Minister Mark Mitchell that gang numbers were increasing and meeting self-imposed police number targets was going to be challenging, they also celebrated recently released crime data which saw a drop in victimisation from violent crime. The data set, collected from February 2023 to February 2024, the majority of which time period saw Labour in power and before the implementation of National Party policy, was seen as a success by the government, despite ignoring research and data which says that their changes will cause crime rates to increase. The government has also announced a $13 million investment into a new tourism campaign targeting markets like the United States, China, Australia, and Germany, which is expected to net 23,000 extra visitors to the country. Said Louise Upston, Minister for Tourism, seen here finding out she didn't get Lady Gaga tickets, but Judith Collins did. With an investment of around $550 per tourist, while it may not seem that cost-effective, it's only slightly more expensive than waiting for an Easter sale from Jetstar and just buying 23,000 return flights and giving them away to Australians. Labour's Kieran McAnulty, seen here really chuffed that you did that thing that you've been putting off because you were anxious about it, but you did it and you should be proud of yourself, just like Kieran is proud of you, has said that the Labour Party is prepared for a snap election should one be called. Labour isn't alone in this, though, with New Zealand First, one of the coalition partners, also preparing for a snap election, which is the political equivalent of a horror movie phone call coming from inside the House. Political pundits expect the change of Deputy Prime Minister roles to be the start of more vocal pushback from New Zealand First towards the rest of the coalition, since Peters knows his party does better when seen as opposition. But since Peters' current voters think they're going to take the country back with a man who has spent half of the past decade as Deputy Prime Minister, this means the stuntery and buffoonery will need to increase to be viable, and political pundits seem to think that there's a limit to how much Luxon will take before he snaps and calls a snap election. However, Luxon has shown by his masterful negotiations with his coalition partners that he's willing to burn the country to the ground to keep power. So only time will tell how this unfolds. The ACT Party has come under fire for using an AI-generated image of a happy Māori couple created with a specific prompt to create images of Māori to promote what it thinks are successes in its government's policy to reduce the cost of living. Said a spokesperson for the party, there are no actual rules yet around the use of artificially intelligent created images for electioneering. And this way is both much more cost-effective and a lot easier than finding actual Māori people who would pose for us, let alone support the party. Millionaire toy company founder and Donald Trump supporter Nick Mowbray has revealed he's facing a tariff bill of over $3 billion under Donald Trump's tariff regime. Mowbray, who manufactures plastic toys in China, is facing a 145% tariff on all goods he exports to the US. Recently, Mowbray has jumped on the anti-Benjamin Doyle bandwagon based on selective content taken out of context, tried to justify Elon's Nazi salutes, criticised the school lunch program, criticised Guy Williams for asking David Seymour questions the media wouldn't, reposted content from former Free Speech Union members pushing the racist Great Replacement theory, and InfoWars' Alex Jones. So the New Zealand media has naturally given Mowbray as much sympathy as possible. The Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, Brendan Horsley, seen here watching the Watchers, has looked into a complaint from former Radio New Zealand reporter Mick Hall that the NZIS had been investigating him after it was revealed Hall had breached editorial standards and was accused of publishing a false Russian sub-narrative into a Reuters story. The investigation into Hall found there were no concerns of foreign interference, and Horsley found the steps entirely appropriate for the spy agency. Said Horsley, hopefully now the NZSIS can look at the work of people like Counterspin's Calvin Alp and Chantal Baker and see if their pro-Russian stances and trips to the area might be a bit of a red flag with a little yellow sickle. Consultation is open for the refresh into the education system's reproduction and sexuality guidelines, which Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters has decried as woke, and former ACT Party President Tim Jago has called an annoying tool which stops me doing my thing. Education Minister Erica Stanford, seen here blowing her own horn, bassoon, went through great pains to make sure the media knew that the process and consultation documents had not been influenced by New Zealand First MPs, who have been vocal opponents to giving young people tools on how to recognise healthy relationships and accept each other for who they are. David Seymour, seen here trying his best to sing opera, is coming under fire for the cost of his charter school project this week, which comes with an approximate price tag of $43,500 per child, having only got 215 children enrolled across the 7 current charter schools. This is a cost of 5 times that of the standard rate that a state school would spend on a child annually. Said Seymour, yes, we are dedicated to cutting wasteful spending, like school lunches, but if I spend it, it's not wasteful. Why would anyone want to check that out? How about I get those guys with the highest public servant salaries at my Ministry of Regulation to look into how you're wasting money by asking me to be accountable? Former ACT Party President Tim Jago has announced he would be seeking his conviction to be lessened to home detention and a miscarriage of justice be ruled in his case because he feels the jury didn't take long enough to deliberate and that the judge had been mean to him. While many are calling this an abuse of the legal system and a way to minimise the harm he caused, especially after using his connection to the ACT Party to justify elongated name suppression, those who 2 weeks ago were screaming about a blue swirl and out-of-context images and comments on an old Benjamin Doyle post, claiming they were just worried about the children, have remained oddly quiet on the topic. Concerns have been raised in the United States after Harvard University received demands from the president, who once ran a pyramid scheme selling what he called university courses, to allow an overseer to audit all courses, only allow ones he authorises, or run the risk of funding cuts. In response, New Zealand Tertiary Education Minister Penny Simmonds, seen here realising the Prime Minister has given Andrew Bailey a promotion after 2 incidents involving inappropriate behaviour where she was demoted for following government guidelines to slash expenses at any cost, said, universities should be free to promote a diversity of opinions and encourage students to explore new ideas and perspectives. And that's why we're forcing all campuses here to allow the Free Speech Union, who weirdly only platform far-right speakers and refuse to acknowledge the harm hate speech has, to be led onto campuses, instead of allowing campuses to run independently and without concern of governmental meddling. On Wednesday, large parts of the Lower South Island were impacted by a series of unfortunate events that resulted in widespread internet outages. While a construction crew had accidentally sliced through the backup fibre cables, rats had managed to chew through the primary supply cable for the internet. A spokesperson for One New Zealand has said that they're working on ways to make the cables less appealing to rats, and were thinking that coating them in cheese as insulation may not have been the smartest move. Former Labour Party leader Andrew Little, seen here showing you the definition of a zaddy and hoping you don't let Winston see or have it explained to him, has announced he plans to run for the Wellington mayoralty at this year's local body elections. But he has some stiff competition. Owner of the Post, Sinead Boucher, has said, as media we're clearly impartial, which is why we're putting together this right-wing bunch of influential Wellingtonians to not influence the election outcome at all. And we're not sure Little is our kind of person. While Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau has said, I have a lot of respect for the work that Little did in Parliament, especially when he stepped aside and let Jacinda Ardern take over. And finally, beloved character actor Sam Neill, known for his roles in Hunt for the Wilder People, Peaky Blinders and Event Horizon, this week had a heartwarming reunion with a star from his most well-known film, Jurassic Park. In a sweet tribute that came with an apology to director Steven Spielberg, Neill showed his co-star his farm and the unique scenery of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Here, let's take a look. And that's this week's The News. Make sure you're looking after yourself wherever you are out there, and we'll catch you all next time. Hey, thanks for checking out this week's Omnibus edition. As I said at the beginning, I'm trying to keep it short because I don't know how much longer I'm going to have power on today. At least my power bill will be quite low this month. Anyway, thanks again for checking everything out. Don't forget to hit that like button on the video, or to share the video, or subscribe to the channel, or maybe consider becoming a paid subscriber so you get stuff for free beforehand. Until next time, look after yourself, live long, prosper, be one with the Force, and I'll catch you guys all next week. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.